the resolution changed actually. Okay.
Try extend.
Extend is just...
Nothing is happening. I mean, the screen doesn't even react, right? So let's try that.
It's work. I mean, they bought it.
Maybe we can just let's see what the secretariat says when they turn up. Anyway, I'll get a hit.
He has
Yeah. Oh, actually, now it's even worse. Come on,
There were some troubles with the projector at the last second.
Yeah.
Okay, what were the problems last time?
He couldn't get it to
Connect?
Yeah, we're gonna just see duplicate. That's what I want, duplicate.
get crapped out.
So how did it work in the end? Because they were projecting.
I mean, he had a Mac, so
They were projecting at the end.
right. He couldn't get it to.
Yeah, it's not.
What is, did you look circuit?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not doing it for the first time. Yeah, I think it's a projector.
Oh.
Well, do you know who Williams was?
Have you uploaded his presentation?
I didn't. Oh. There you go.
Yeah, okay.
So they were replacing the projector. She's going to do that.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Like 6 minutes, so plenty of time. So I talked to Stephen last night, and he said, well, he thought getting somebody in to document current deployment practice is a good idea, and he had ideas of who he could think to do that. Somebody from Comcast was deploying stuff like that right now, and that was he was going to help with that. I get the sense that. So maybe he understands both. Yes, but maybe it is, right, for the things that they're trying to do.
So I asked our people,
Yeah,
and we want to do it.
Yeah,
Fix
right.
the problem.
Right, exactly.
So we need to figure out.
The other thing. Somebody like a public statement. And we'll see what happens. But Sean doesn't believe that there is enough.
Oh, you know that the 15 is an example from the IETF. IETF 3 is an example in the existing density fields. The example is
Right.
Right.
For specific cases.
For specific.
But
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
there's, I mean, we're talking about a generic thing, right? Anyway. So we're trying to solve a projector issue here. And while we wait for that, you can all break out your own copy of the note well and look at it. Because that's what I would have been projecting from up front. Your computer seems to like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, your computer likes it. So. Yeah. Try that. Yeah. Ooh. There we go. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. So we're getting there. I think you need to connect it in order to. Yeah. You have to do that in the. You're gonna have to do that over there, right? No, don't close that. I would just run the head right now. Not that one, the other. Share deck. Next one. That one. Yeah. Okay. Let's just do this. Okay. Welcome to UTA. Hopefully you're all in the right place, unless you've sort of just remaining here from the previous session, who I hear was quite entertaining. Sorry I missed it. Note the note well. We have a relatively short agenda today, so if you're all good, you get to go home early. Let's do the next slide. Our mailing list, for those of you who may not be aware, is UTA@IETF.org. And our agenda is, we're going to spend a couple of minutes on status update and agenda bashing, but not too much. So since we met last, we've had actually quite a lot of progress. We've progressed a couple of documents. We have our first document published as RC7457. It used to be the UTA drafts. It's all done. Yeah. The TLS draft, the BCP draft is in the editor's queue. There are a couple of minor nits left to do, but that will soon get sorted. The XMPP draft is also in ISG queue. We haven't actually heard back on that one yet, but we don't expect that to be problematic. And right now, the documents we're looking at is two. We have the deep document, which we will get, Chris will talk to us about in a minute. And then we have Alexei's TLS identity check procedures for email. Alexei, Alexei, you're there. Can you just sort of summarize the status of that document?
Right, so I just posted 02 as you asked, which finish unterminated sentence.
Excellent.
But the main change in 01 was splitting, instead of having requirements on all different type of actors like mail user, client writers, ONC, certificate authorities, etc. In one section, I split them into separate sections, and this actually caught one error, and I think I made the requirements more consistent. So I was a bit skeptical before I did this, but I think it actually improves the document, and I think at this point it's stable and should be ready for working group last call.
Okay, so let's get a quick sense of the room. Who here has read this draft? Okay, well, some. We haven't seen any of you guys say anything about you having read your draft on the mailing list. It wouldn't hurt if somebody could just sort of pipe up on the list saying, yes, I read it, it looks okay. Given we see that, we're going to issue a working group last call within the next couple of weeks, but it would really help to get one or two more, yes, I read it, it looks okay reviews. You don't actually have to find faults with the document, because reviewing it doesn't mean you have to find any fault with it. It's just okay just to say that you've read it and think it's done. So all in all, we're actually in pretty good shape. I will turn the word over to Chris. We've been asked to remind everybody that when you're presenting and you're standing up front, you're supposed to stand in the pink box on the floor. Exactly that.
Okay, is the speaker on?
Microphone?
Yes, the microphone.
Fiddle with the controls.
Tap it.
No.
Not a box
There you go.
Okay, I think we have microphone now. Okay, I did a revision of the draft, and it's now a working group draft. So this is just the overview of what's in the draft for people who are spectators and haven't read it. And if you haven't read it yet, I'd really like you to read it, because I want to get this done relatively soon. But this is the overview of what's in the draft. Basically, it's a set of things with the intent of improving confidentiality for the link between the mail user agent and the server. This is not about MTA to MTA relay. That's out of scope for this document. So this is the basic overview. Moving on, the changes I made to this revision. I believe the technical content's largely complete. We renamed the privacy assurance to confidentiality assurance, and based on Russ's review, I need to do a little more wordsmithing about that, because that is the correct terminology for what this is providing. And I renamed low privacy assurance to no privacy assurance, or to no confidentiality assurance, because I think that works better. Other wordsmithing, it's now a working group draft. and I folded in a bunch of review comments from my co-author Keith. So to do, I need to fold in the comments that Russ made. I agreed with all of them, so I'll just make them, unless there are further comments on those topics. And I need to add an explicit reference to the TLS BCP. So those are the two items that I definitely have. And I'm also inclined to do a pass over it to see if I can improve readability and approachability of the draft a little bit. Moving on to the next slide. So the open issues. So one of the open issues, I had an item to go gather deployment data on port 465 versus 587, and I haven't had time to gather that data yet. So basically, right now, the document is recommending port 465 over 587. The recommendation that ends up in the final document should be backed by what's actually deployed, and I want to understand the relative deployment of port 465 versus 587, because if we go with port 465, there are process issues that are challenging. So if it's the case that port 580, that every ISP that offers port 465 also offers port 587, then I think we should just go with port 587 to avoid the process difficulties. But we need to gather that data. So does anybody have cycles to gather data on like significant ISPs and clients support for these ports? Guessing not, I guess that stays on my plate, and I'll try to get it done as soon as possible. The next open issue, this is one that came up in a discussion Heath and I were having, and I wanted to, I think this is a really interesting one for the group to discuss. There's a design trade-off in here where the current spec, the way it's written, if you have a no confidentiality assurance account set up and it's not using TLS on those connections, and then suddenly the server says, wait a minute, I'm now offering TLS. There is a model that the current approach will try to use TLS. If it uses it, if it can use it even though the cert doesn't verify, it will latch on TLS so that it will keep using TLS. So the idea is you get confidentiality, if the site wasn't using TLS and then starts offering it but without a valid cert, it'll at least get the passive protection. So that's how the current draft's written. The downside to this approach is there's an obvious denial of service attack of you're a Joe ISP with no SSL, and I insert a man in the middle and say, hey, I'm offering SSL now, and I want you to latch it on. And then the client latches it on, and now you can't connect to your ISP anymore. So there's a denial of service attack against the client with the model that's currently in the draft. The other approach is, sorry, if the cert doesn't validate, we can't latch on SSL, and so we'll just do it in the clear. All your data will go in the clear on that no confidentiality assurance connection. So that would solve that one denial of service attack, but you lose passive confidentiality protection. So I would like input from the working group on which of these two approaches they like better, because I think this is a really interesting question. I would like to do that now.
Oh, we got face-to-face time, right? That's usually.
Yeah, let's
Well, I have two questions.
Go to the microphone, please. And people are listening remotely. No, but it's a short distance.
Was
State name, please.
Ladar Levison, was DANE considered for detecting the presence of an SSL certificate on a particular port? And was there any consideration about possibly updating the auto configuration scheme for indicating that a TLS certificate should be available and should be required so that you can't have start TLS stripping?
Okay, so right now, this doesn't have very many references to DANE. So there is if you have a DANE validated certificate that's not PKIX validated, that's supported in the current document. I've had some open issues for a while where if someone contributes text, I'd be interested in possibly folding that text in. So for the service setup part of the document, I explain how to use the existing SRV setup to do account setup, and there is a way to extend that to leverage DANE. And if somebody provided text for me to add to the document to do that, I would most likely be supportive of adding that text.
Independent ID.
But yeah, that's independent of this particular problem that I'm raising. So anyway, if you want more DANE support in the document, submit text to the list of what you would like added to the document.
So the idea of using DANE was to detect when the certificate was changed, to avoid this denial of service problem once the certificate has been pinned to the IMAP connection in an HSTS fashion. The other idea was indicating that TLS was mandatory in the SRV record somehow.
So the way email account setup works is you look at the SRV record only once, and you generally don't look at it again. So that's why the HSTS style account indicator is in the protocol with this draft. It's not, it's done in the protocol the same way it's done in HTTP, but mapped to the email model. So no, I did not think of doing HSTS approach in using the DNS. And the main reason I don't think that's very interesting is right now it's very hard to get your hands on DNSSEC in a deployment. So I certainly I cannot write DNS software. I cannot get access to servers to test it on. Sorry.
In my head, I'm thinking through the scenario of if you can stipulate in DNS system that a server supports TLS, then a client should presumably only connect to the host name.
Have you read the draft?
No.
Please do read the draft, and in Section 8 has the discussion of the SRV account setup model in the draft, and it has some discussion of advertising SSL in there, and the document it references also has discussion of that. So please read that, see if it meets your needs, and if not, let's see some suggestions for text to improve the document. I appreciate that. Thanks.
David Lampotter. To extend on your answer, I don't think DANE can currently indicate that there must be SSL available. I think it can only refer to the certificate to be used and authenticate that, but that's a bit that's missing from DANE, and I think that needs to be added. So I kind of support the question, and I think someone needs to go to DANE and add that as a separate capability, but it's not there as far as I know.
Yeah, I'm generally keeping so far I've generally kept this very loosely coupled to DANE. I think what's in here is mostly complementary to what DANE's doing.
Yeah. Keith Moore, yeah, I like DANE in principle, although I think that without DNSSEC, basically you just create a different set of security holes. And so, getting DNSSEC deployed is proving to be quite difficult, or slow at least. I guess, my feeling is, if we get a reliable indication from the server that it now supports TLS and will continue to do so, then it's reasonable to trust that. And reliable means that it's coming over a TLS encrypted and authenticated connection with a certificate that we trust, and that we sort of trust axiomatically. And the question I have is, how do we know when that's good enough for that purpose? And I don't know that I have the answer, because there's sort of lots of little corner cases there. But what's your thinking about that?
Well, I think that case is not controversial. If you can validate the server cert, and the cert says, I support TLS with cert validation in the session, you latch it on, you're done. I think that's already covered in the current text. The part that I think is open to change is the part where, okay, I've been talking to the account, there's been no TLS at all of a sudden see, okay, I can now do TLS with this server, and the server, I can't validate the cert. The cert doesn't validate, but I can get an encrypted pipe so that I have at least passive confidentiality. And then the server says, by the way, I am offering TLS, but not offering valid certs, and I'm doing this indefinitely. So the question is, when that scenario happens, should the client latch on and insist on TLS in the future even though the cert doesn't validate, or should the client just use it for that session and then the next time if there's no TLS, sorry, you get no confidentiality? Those are the two options. I think it's a really interesting question.
Should we vote?
I'm not sure I've heard enough.
No, you should stand up at the microphone and express your opinion, actually. That's what you should do.
Yeah.
This is Pete Resnick. So if you haven't validated the cert, I would think that it is effectively doing, straight Diffie-Hellman, and it's the opportunistic case.
Yeah.
And the answer is, next time you arrive, whatever, because you can't tell who you've been talking to. The next time you arrive, if it's clear text only and TLS is not available, maybe you were talking to some bad actor last time when you got the TLS. I would just continue to do the opportunistic thing of, if the TLS is available, use it. If not, don't latch, because you don't know who the bad actor in this play is, the clear text guy or the TLS guy. And it could be a denial of service attack by inserting TLS during the session that you saw it.
Well, that's the argument for that side, so I'll make the argument for the other approach. The other approach is, if my service provider can't, for some reason can't buy a cert, but he can get TLS on the server, I would rather have passive confidentiality than in the clear. And an active attacker can always get me, so that's fine. And so I'd actually, and in the case where an active attacker starts, pretending to be the server and saying I want you to turn on TLS and require it, I'm actually okay with a denial of service attack, because the customer will call up the ISP and say, why don't I have any confidentiality all of a sudden? And so I'd like the pressure on the ISPs to roll out proper encryption that introduces. So that's sort of the trade-off.
Come on, Sean.
So, Keith Morgan, I think one of the things that occurs to me, I think a pinned cert is a trusted cert, that it's axiomatically trusted just as much as one from a trusted, signed by a trusted CA.
Yeah.
I think if you get a latch declaration from the server that says we support this feature from a pinned cert, that you should trust that equally as you trust one, whatever. I think if you don't have that, but the pinned cert is something that's explicit configuration. So just because you've seen a server advertise a cert before doesn't mean a thing. And you should basically, it's always fine to try to negotiate TLS, but it's not fine to trust whatever that server says as some indication of the future. And the thing that concerns me is maybe you have bad actors that advertise this feature, and that's basically done as a way to get people to turn this feature off in their user agents. And I think that's kind of what happens when people don't understand. It's like, well, let's just revert to the old behavior because it will probably be there supported in the user agent, and it doesn't cause us support calls. So one way or another, I think that's what tends to happen. So I would actually, on balance, rather not trust it. I also think it's simpler that way. It's easier to describe in a way that's likely to be implemented correctly.
Iran Sheffer. So first of all, you use the term passive security. You don't get passive security if in fact you trust the certificate. On the other hand, unfortunately, you can get an incorrect certificate from middle boxes, so not just active man-in-the-middle attackers, which on balance I think would mean that if, for example, if you normally deploy your client behind a coffee shop access point or an airport access point, you're vulnerable to this kind of so-called attack. So unfortunately you cannot latch in these cases.
So I have a simple question, and maybe it's stupid, but if you get TLS, and even if certificate doesn't validate, you still can encrypt. But don't latch, don't change anything. Continue every time.
There's the question of, do we want a way to latch on encryption without authentication? So, passive protection. And what I'm hearing so far is no, we don't want a way to do that in this instance. And I'm okay with if that's the rough consensus.
What I say, you do opportunistically, you encrypt opportunistically, but you don't play with the latches in this case. That's what I say.
Yeah. Okay.
Stephen Farrell. So yeah, it's a tricky problem. I mean, would it make sense to latch for a short period? So no, but in the case where you have a provider who has a self-signed cert or something like that, right? Your pattern is probably that you're going to pick up mail every day or something, maybe, at least.
People's use of email varies from every few days to every 5 minutes. So.
Right. Well, so if it's a provider that I only talk to every week or something, then it's probably okay to not latch. That any warnings or whatever that you want to pop up, you may as well do that in that case. But if you latch it for a day, let's say, or something, then you don't fall prey to the coffee shop if you pick up your mail before the latch kind of expires. So, right, and the denial of service is then just for a day. So I'm not sure it works, but
really interesting point. But I don't think I could write that in a document in a way that I think would be implemented well.
That's possible, yeah. I mean, because the text would be something like you'd be recommending a latch time of a day or something for self-signed service type things.
So do you want to? I see Keith at the mic, but do you want to at that point take a stab at formulating a HUM question for us?
Yeah, let's hear what Keith has to say.
I think the main danger of the thing that you want is you want to upgrade to confidentiality when you can, but you also want to minimize the number of support calls that result from this mechanism. So that's the trade-off, and I feel like that anything that's kind of hard for support people to predict, like here's a timer going off on this laptop or whatever, I feel like that actually makes a support situation worse. And yeah, I would lean against it for that reason.
So that's a fair point, I think. On the other hand, there are quite a few mail servers that do have certificates that don't verify that are okay.
Well, the thing I remember, I'm MUA only. So MTA relay is a completely different security scenario.
Message stores, like servers, POP servers,
and submission servers.
So there's quite a bunch of those that don't have good certs, as far as I understand it. Right? It's not
I'm not aware of that as a major problem. I would, if there is data on submission, IMAP, and POP servers with invalid certs, I would like to see that data, because my understanding is that generally the certs are fine on all three of those. And this is actually surprising.
Otherwise you would get support issues.
This is surprising because submission servers, there's actually zero requirement in any of our published standards to validate the cert in any way, which is one of the things I want to fix.
So if it's, I mean, I thought it was more common, but if it's less common, then I think maybe not matching is probably the right.
So it feels like we're in danger of bike shedding this. Let's see if we can get.
Okay, let me try the HUM question. So the first HUM will be if you believe we should upgrade, we should latch passive defense only when we see TLS but can't validate the cert. So If you, and the second will be the opposite of we don't latch passive only TLS.
Right, and there's always the third option of I don't know, I need more information.
Yeah, and the third option. Okay, so the first hum, which is upgrade from no security to passive defense. This is
latch.
It on.
The options are latch, don't latch, and I have no freaking clue.
Okay, so the latch option. I'm going to hum slightly because I was proposing this.
Latch invalid certs.
Okay, so now hum if you do not want to latch. And
we need more information. Yeah. All right. So
okay, I hear rough consensus.
Yeah, that's rough consensus on don't latch. And somebody desperately wants to bug shed now?
No, it's Jeff Hodges. You mentioned HSTS. Yes, there's a model for that. Similar model. There's a section on using self-signed certs in conjunction with HSTS and RFC 6797, which basically says you got to distribute root certs to your users' boxes because we kill the connection if it's unauthenticated.
Okay, I'll go read that text and see if there's something I can pick up and adapt as part of this change.
This is Barry, just finishing the loop on the hum. To be clear, anybody who thinks we're totally broken and things are really bad if we choose the don't latch option, speak up right now. Not preference, but we're really broken if we do it that way. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you for asking that question.
Right.
I forgot to ask it.
I move down the list.
Okay, moving down, this is a question I wanted to ask. So the mandatory to implement cipher in the IMAP base spec is RSA, RC4, SHA-1, 128. This is mandatory to implement for interoperability. The current text I have in this draft says, we're not changing that it's mandatory to implement, but you can turn it off by default. Should I be stronger about changing that? As in, should I say, okay, the IMAP spec has now changed, that cipher suite is no longer mandatory to implement. The mandatory to implement for IMAP is now the TLS 1.2 cipher the BCP recommends.
Sean Turner, yes. Update it, please.
Alexi, I want to hear what you have to say on this.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, the thing is, a lot of implementations are using standard libraries, so they use whatever is bundled. So although IMAP doesn't recommend using TLS 1.2, I assume a lot of clients and servers actually do in practice. So I don't see a problem with updating.
This is Barry, and the bottom line is what this really means is advice to the library maintainers.
Well, it's actually, because it's in the IMAP spec, it's advice to IMAP implementers when selecting which library and version to use.
Yeah. Go give your library later.
Yes. I'm not sure I need, given the comments, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't think we need a home.
I think I'll just change it.
Yep.
Okay, the next bullet is improve document organization.
Actually, question.
Yes.
Why just IMAP? Don't you want to update all three to be the same?
Okay, so submission does not have a mandatory to implement, I believe, so it inherits what's in the TLS 1.2 base spec as its mandatory to implement. And I believe that, and I'm not sure what POP3 does. I don't remember.
I don't know. I just would make all of the three the same.
So you would actually want me to explicitly update all three documents to set a mandatory to implement to what the BCP says?
This is Pete. A recommendation from security folk is the other choice is to go in the other direction and say and do a dereference. Whatever TLS says to do, that's what you want to do, and so take it out of IMAP specifically and say, what's mandatory and implement is written over there, go look over there. Does that make sense? Or do you want IMAP to actually, all three of these to say it's mandatory to implement this particular cipher suite?
Yeah.
You want to, right, you want to reference the Utah BCP, and that will get updated as it goes. But you're not specifying the actual cipher suite.
So what I want to do is make an update to the base spec, deleting the mandatory to implement cipher from the base spec and replacing it with the current, a reference to the current PCP.
Yeah.
Security folks are
Yeah, I'm John Levine. If I could, if it's okay if I say something about the first bullet?
Sure. Can we just finish there?
Well, yeah, let's finish this section and then.
So you don't even have to sit down. I think Sean is going to be
It's
quick.
going to be quick. This is kind of a nit, Chris. I think that the spec, the requirement for the MTI of 1.2 in the email deep specs is it's TLS RSA with AES 128 CBC SHA, but the Utah BCP draft says GCM. So should we make those two the same? Or?
I was going to, it was on my to-do on the previous slide is reference the BCP properly.
Right, so the consensus is that you don't copy text, you will reference the BCP.
Yes.
Good. All right, so we'll close that for that one and move back to the first.
Yeah, editor has sufficient advice and will execute.
Gmail, Yahoo, AOL, Comcast do support port 465. Hotmail does not. And I think that as we go, as you scale down, I think you're going to find more or less the same thing. The majority of providers do support 465.
They also support 587.
Oh, everybody supports 587. I think you're going to discover that the majority of people support 465. There's going to be considerable pain by the minority, but for the significant minority who don't.
So you're saying the data is that anybody who has 465 also has 587?
Yes.
With Start TLS?
Yes.
If that is what you're saying, that suggests data supports a change in the draft. And so one of the reasons the draft is written the current way is it's kind of architecturally clean to say, for IMAP POP and submit, we prefer the separate port because that's deploy. But what I'm going to have to change to is for IMAP and POP, we prefer the separate port because if you survey the providers, the separate port, IMAP and POP, anytime IMAP Start TLS and POP Start TLS are available, the separate port is also available. But the other is not true. You can find providers with a separate port, but not Start TLS.
Well, and significant,
But if the opposite is true of SMDP submission, then it makes the spec more complicated to write.
No question. But although that is a tiny survey, that's clearly what's the majority of mailboxes in this continent. So it's sort of an interesting set of providers.
Yeah, I'm going to try to do a slightly bigger survey, but I really appreciate that. And if you know of somebody who might be able to get me data on a slightly bigger data set, I really appreciate that.
I'll ask my mod buddies if they happen to have it lying around.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
I think Keith was ahead of you.
I think there were more reasons besides just deployment that a separate port seemed to make more sense, and I say that as the inventor of Start TLS, but I don't necessarily recall what they were. I feel like the issue with a separate port was originally if you try to sort of do opportunistic upgrades, you've got some vulnerabilities there. But as long as you have things latched, then I think the separate port's actually better. So I think the desirable end state is that we use the separate port for these things, and then we eventually deprecate use of the unencrypted port. So I would like to avoid declaring the desirable end state to be use Start TLS for submission.
There's some controversy. because I've heard both sides. I'm relatively neutral on this point. Although I actually do feel fairly strongly about the text in the current document that says we should register port 465 as a port that has dual use in the wild. And I know the registry folks won't like that. But I'm a believer in reality over process.
You should do something about that. So, Stephen, back to the previous issue.
Back to mandatory to implement. Okay.
Right. So I'm not entirely remembering what the generic BCP says, but I think it has like a few, because we're talking about TLS in the broad, it has some recommendations, but it also says there's these other cipher suites that are still okay too, or if you're in this situation, you might want to do that. Catering for the JAD environment, which had those short Diffie-Hellman values and so on, right? I think in this case we don't have to be so constrained. So I think you can say here, you can still dereference it, but it's not quite to say point at the BCP. You want to say point at the BCP and use the preferred cipher suites is the MTI.
Right. I saw a discussion about that on another draft, and so I was going to refer to the cipher suites in this section are the mandatory to implement.
Right, but I think in this case you can kind of tie it down very, very tightly for these protocols. So Alexi said instead of 3 you can pick one, which I think you can do here probably.
Okay.
Right, but you don't necessarily know that the future versions of the BCP is going to make those distinctions or have those. So it may make sense just for simplicity, just keep a simple reference, so we don't have to go, update both ends of the reference when we update the BCP.
Yeah, but on the other hand, we don't necessarily want, so the BCP does allow some things that are probably not ideal. We probably don't want to have those coming in here, if it's feasible to not have them. So exactly what wording we use, I don't really care, but just point at the best bits of the BCP, not the ones we have to live with.
So, Keith Morgan, I feel like the thing with the cipher suites is if you tie this to some external document that can change, then you might actually break interoperability when that set of cipher suites changes. And you'll have skew between one implementation and another about which things they implement. So I actually think that the time, if you're going to have a binding of those things, you should bind to a specific document, not to like a BCP number or something like that. And even though we realize these recommendations will change over time, that has to be propagated back to the application protocol specs.
Yeah, and this is Barry. I don't think that really matters the way we do references. The reference will point to a specific RFC, not the BCP in general. Yeah.
Okay. This has been very helpful. Okay, any more on the first 3 bullets? If not, oh, you got one.
The ADs should sit down in front. ADs down in front. Oh. Right. Or it wants to say something and then we'll move on.
Yeah, so I would like just to add about the start TLS versus the registered port and whether it's which one of them and whether dual registration. So whatever case we choose in the end, I just think that it needs to be written in the document in what sequence the client should do these things and the server should do these things, because otherwise we'll just add more interoperability problems to whatever we may have already. Just the general engineering thing. Thank you.
Yeah, what I may try to do on that is to write the text for both, which of course involves the sequencing text. And then we'll see how much we hate that text, and if we want to actually go for, tune towards one. Okay. Moving on to the 4th bullet, there has been some controversy on the list about document or organization and clarity. And so, I mean, the way the document's currently structured is I came up with a set of, there are a set of ideas that all move towards the same goal. I wrote them roughly in the order I thought of them. and then I moved them around to try to eliminate forward references. So that's the current document organization. I will not pretend that is an algorithm to get an ideally readable document. So I am open to suggestions on reordering sections in the document and restructuring it to try to make it clearer. My request on this topic is that the term BCP not be used as part of this discussion. I'm okay with various organizations, but I don't think BCP is a constructive categorization mechanism. Partly because you can talk to two different IETF people and get two different thoughts on what should go in BCP and what shouldn't. So I'd like to have this discussion at the level of, can we put this section before this section? And one of the things I wanted to point out, Russ actually made some suggestions on reordering sections that I thought made sense to me, and I'll just do them. So anyway, I wanted to invite suggestions to improve the organization. Did anyone want to have additional comments on that topic, or shall we just continue discussing that on the list?
Just a comment, because we chairs have been involved in this discussion. So, sort of my way of looking at this is that your document tries to do the B and BCP, and then there are others who might have ways of describing what people are doing today, which might not be the optimal or even a good way of doing hop-to-hop email security. I personally would find it interesting if somebody would come along and describe, just write a draft saying this is how hop-by-hop email security is done in production today. It may not represent the best, right, current practice, or even current practice, right?
Right.
And that's a separate thing, right? That's a completely different story. If somebody has information out there about deployment experience, hop-by-hop email security, I think it would be really interesting to get some of that down on paper. That's not what you're trying to do.
Right, yeah. So this document's focused on the MUA to server hops, POP, IMAP, and submission only.
Right.
The MTA relay hop-to-hop model is different and is very different and broken, and there's some sort of de facto agreements happening out there right now in the wild, but I can tell you my involvement with service providers as a mail server engineer is that service providers are having to wire up special one-to-one agreements for certificate validation right now, because the standard, there is nothing written down that's clear enough about how to validate certs. And if you do write something, you have to write, well, you can validate this way, which is secure, but a lot of sites don't do that, so you have to validate it this way, which is not secure, by the way. And so the current practice is there is no active attacker protection for MTA to MTA hops right now, bottom line, except ones that have been specifically configured.
Right. I just think it would be interesting for the IETF community and for the working group to have a description of that, those kinds of things.
There is a draft out. It has UTA in the title. It's an individual submission. I think Friedel is the author, and that's trying to start the work on the MTA to MTA hop. And so I gave him some feedback on that, and hopefully that's something that can come to this group as a separate working item soon. Okay, so that was, I think, the end of my slides, although they just went black. Oh yeah, any working group specific document text suggestions, I'm open to. Now's the time to get them done, because the technical content is, other than the issues we just discussed, pretty close to done. So, any other topics on this document?
I actually want to ask who has read the current version of the draft. current version, or any version of the draft. Okay, let's do that. All right. So I would very much like to see a couple of somebody who would be volunteering to write a review on the mailing list, just to, even if it's just to say that it's okay or it's looking good, right? But could somebody volunteer? Can I get a couple of volunteers to commit to doing a review?
There's an obligated
First slide. Back to the first screen.
Yes. There you go. Draft IETF UTA email deep. We have this thing called the data tracker that helps us with that. David, thank you for volunteering. And Sean is going to volunteer as well.
Yeah, I mean, I volunteered last time I do it, so I actually did read it. I just haven't sent the email yet. Chris, can you explain, maybe, I'm completely forgetting this, so I won't explain it well, but say a client latches on 1.1 and then TLS 1.2, so the server says, hey, I do 1.1 and only, and the client latches. And then the server gets upgraded and does 1.2. When is it able to upgrade to 1.2?
Okay, so with the latching model, well, first, there isn't a 1.1 latch. I didn't see
no one's implementing it, right?
Yeah. Suppose you have 1.0 latch. What the 1.0 latch means is the server has made a commitment to support TLS 1.0 or later. That's what the latch means.
Okay, so I skipped that part. Okay, sorry.
So as soon as the server...
So what happens if 1.0 we find out that, oops, that's not so hot anymore, we want to get rid of that, and they want to upgrade to like 1.3 or whatever and don't do anything that's below whatever version?
So there's a 1.2 latch.
Right.
Right now, and when 1.3 comes out, we can
so
add a 1.3 latch.
But for the clients...
And so basically what happens, if the server says, I'm offering 1.2 and I want you to latch it, then the client will latch it, assuming it successfully negotiates 1.2 and validates the cert.
No, I'm just going through my head that I want to reread the draft to make sure that that's clear, because I want to make sure that as we get newer versions that it's like, oh, that's what I did.
Yes, I'm of course deep in the implementing, and I've been doing emails since the late 80s. So I am. I do not pretend that this is the clearest document it could be. So right now I'm quite open to clarity improvements.
Honestly, when I read it, I was like, that's pretty good. I mean, like, it's kind of on point. It was clear. There were some questions that you had in the back about should we split this out and do all that. And I was like, it seems like more work for you. So we should try to keep it easier on the document authors.
Well, that's a bad attitude.
This is Pete. I'm going to make the same claim that Sean did, is I don't remember. But does the client have the option to say, I don't accept 1.0 latches? Because I think 1.0 is screwed up. Right? I think the idea is there going to come a point where we write a BCP that says TLS 1.0 is hosed. You should not use it anymore. It's as bad as using bad, broken crypto. And clients should say, I don't latch on 1.0 even if you tell me to. Is that at least a possibility in what you've written?
Well, I mean, certainly if a BCP says don't use 1.0, then when you've set the 1.0 latch, what it will mean is actually negotiate 1.2. That's what the latch would mean in that case. Because the latch is defined as 1.0 or later. Now I'm making an assumption here that we won't release a subsequent TLS version that's worse than the previous version. I hope that assumption is correct. Otherwise, the design is flawed.
No, that's an interesting.
Right, or the other thing is that, TLS forks in such a way that the version numbers are no longer linear, but there's some other facility besides TLS that you might want to start using, and then everything that's latched TLS will sort of need to back up and do something else, and we're not necessarily planning for that.
Well, I mean, that's why there's a registry of tags. tags. So we actually, I think we did plan for that because you can define new latch tags in the future.
Yeah, the scenario I'm envisioning is a server supports 1.3, and then somewhere down the line, some other technology becomes favored, and meanwhile the clients have all latched 1.3, and we'd have to define the latches in such a way that it's like, you know, XYZ 1.0 is actually greater than or equal to TLS 1.3.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe we can have a proper description language that encapsulates all of this.
Exactly. I'm pretty happy with what we have on this. I think it's about right.
So, I mean, it sounds like we're done, yeah?
Great. I have lots of good input, so I'll
crank out the new version and
try to get a new version as soon as possible.
Some reviewers of that, and we can maybe let's call this.
So we had a commitment for review from David. Did we have a commitment for review from
Sean? Yeah.
Oh, Sean. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks. I really appreciate the reviews, and I'm gonna start trying to chase down client authors, male client authors, and get them to review.
Mm-hmm. That'd be great.
So if anybody has contacts at their company with male client authors, I would appreciate comments from them, because there's always the problem in the email space of most of the specs are written by server engineers, and so client input from client engineers is hard to find. So any help in getting that input, I really appreciate.
Right. That means that we're more or less at the end of our agenda. We have open mic. As you can all see, we're sort of approaching the. You can sort of see the end of the light at the end of the tunnel for this working group. Right? One of the things that, when reviewing our charter, there is one item that sort of we haven't really addressed, and that's some sort of general advice on opportunistic security for TLS. It's not clear. I had a conversation with Stephen. I don't know if you want to speak to this topic, Stephen, but it's not clear to any of us that we even know what the problem is, and that we know enough to formulate anything around this. So, but if somebody feels that they understand what any kind of general advice for opportunistic security for TLS, and feel that they can sort of describe that problem, feel free to do so. Other than that, after deep not seeing, we're hoping for somebody to come along and talk to us and write drafts about server-to-server email security. We might be able to chase somebody down to do that. After that, we're not seeing a huge amount of new work for the working group. If you feel that there is work that the working group should take on, now is the time to go home and try to sort of put pen to paper and suggest work in the form of drafts. All right. And this is open mic time, so.
This is Pete, just organizational stuff, since we've been talking before the meeting. So I'm stepping down as of Wednesday. Yay! Normally I would just transfer stuff over to Barry since I don't have a replacement, but we're in the process of doing a little bit of IESG reorganization. One of the things we did was make it possible to have area directors that are not in the area be responsible for the group. I think it's still useful to have this as an apps area working group because we want to encourage applications people to be looking at this, that it's for them. But we've been talking, and it sounds like Stephen is willing to be the responsible area director for the working group going forward. So likely after next week, when a little shuffling goes on, Stephen will end up with his name on the data tracker for the responsible AD, and there is one document now in publication requested, which magically becomes Stephen's problem instead of mine. So,
well, you could finish it.
I can finish it by Wednesday. Yeah. We'll see if I'm very motivated in these next, or Barry, or one of us will do the AD evaluation for it, and we'll get it on, going through the process. So any question or comments about that? That's pretty much what we're planning at this point. There could always be changes, but that's what we're thinking.
Right? Anybody else who wants to raise any issues? Otherwise, I believe we will get another half hour of coffee break. Thank you all.
That was actually very useful. Well spent time. Good.
Yeah.
Well spent. That's going to be more like this stuff is not really a reason. They have a point. I think they actually have a point because they're actually trying to specify stuff that's not describe what people are. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. So it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Actually, it doesn't matter.
What actually the goals?
Yeah.
Needs to put
Yeah. Yeah.
with the red.
Otherwise, it's not real. Good. Yeah, see how it is. Right, that'd be the interesting. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. So
Yeah, I think this is the work area very usually has more to do with time slot planning for IETF. Which matters in the because I think that's why you should for making sure that since this is apps, they can tolerate conflicts with security working groups better than they can tolerate. Which probably is the right way to.
I was trying to do.
Yeah, right. No, I think this is a good thing. Right. Some of them, no, yeah, you're right. Some people, some of I suspect the IEC is going to force people to explain why. They're going to have to deal with the work. Yeah, I think that's what's going to happen. And then, they either feel that there's something missing from our BCB, and then they will have to.
If we're going to get reopened every 3 years or something, that's what I think is the next step. Yeah. I know.
I think so. Anyway.
I'm good.
For now, we'll continue.
I'm going to go to this. I'll take this to the secretary, right? I can bring them there.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this one.
I'll bring in the blue sheet.
Okay, cool.
I just got to pack it.
Just should not forget this one because this is for...
So is this the time when we start misbehaving then?
Are you talking about Utah or about your different team?
He's ADness.
He's the ideas, okay. Your reduced hardness.
So if, I other than that server mail thing, was there talk of other things going on? A lot of people are just finding that this, that's what we find out now.
I don't think there's stuff coming out. And I think what's going to happen is that we finish this deep stuff pretty easily. If you can rustle up those Comcast guys to do sort of server thingy.
Did you talk to them?
No, I haven't